Hello, Toby here, just to say thank you for downloading this podcast and to point out there's a reason why these podcasts are free at the point of contact, and that is because various patrons make these podcasts possible and also ensure that I can keep them ad-free. So I'd like to draw your attention to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke if you would like to join their number. Thank you. Welcome to Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Hadoke, have to watch a Doctor Who story nominated by a friend of mine and commentate along as I do so, accentuating the positive, but also trying to see if I can guess what my special guest's favourite things about the episode are.
Hello, Toby Hadoke. My name's Chris Chapman, and I make documentaries for the Doctor Who range for the Blu-ray collections at the moment and the DVDs before that. I'm recording for you some things about a Doctor Who story called The Seeds of Doom.
Welcome back, everybody. This has been a story that is a symphony of root, stem, leaf and flower. But the flower power is about to wilt on the bloom as Seeds of Doom reaches its climax. Now, as mentioned last time, and Chris Chapman, who you heard there, special guest, DVD and Blu-ray producer, director, maker of excellent films, really hardworking, really rigorous, always goes the extra mile in terms of production and in terms of scope and ambition, and then occasionally has to scrimp and save when it comes to choice of presenter and use me. Chris has already last week sort of said he feels that The Seeds of Doom is slightly running out of steam, and I think this podcast, Happy Times and Places, has had its presenter, me, an avowed Hinchcliffe fan, admit to the fact that despite my feeling that the Hinchcliffe Holmes oeuvre is the consistently best quality and most to my taste of the entire run, I do have to admit that final installments aren't perhaps this regime's key skill, shall we say. But does that matter? Let us find out and discuss. But anyway, we've had a great time so far. We haven't really chosen many of the same things, although I did get a point last week for the cottage under siege scene that ended with a Molotov cocktail. So let's hope everyone now gets, I don't know, stuck in a bungalow and makes a pipe bomb. It'll be the sort of ending I could get to grips with. So let us press play or watch from the beginning or however you're watching The Seeds of Doom in 3, 2, 1. And so it is the final time that it doesn't seem quite the same without a super in the corner, super channel ident, which is how I watch this many times. And actually these aren't a massive jump in quality for me. Getting some of these stories, having had most of them as bootlegs when I was younger, on official releases or whatever, I was used to a huge leap in quality because some of the things I had were several generations down. But actually, my Seeds of Doom was always in pretty good nick. I think my brother also said that there's no way that a soldier would leave his gun there either. So the soldier leaving his gun there and the plants being put, down carefully as you would do an expensive prop, were the things my brother noticed about this sequence rather than all the absolutely magnificent stuff elsewhere, and that makes me very sad. It's a funny old outfit Sarah's got, and she got sort of culottes on. And it's it's an extraordinary melange of patterns, but it works. Sarah's got Elizabeth Sladen has an actually slightly odd taste in clothes, but it somehow all sort of works. But I'm not sure quite often, many of her outfits, I'm not sure I've seen anybody else wear anywhere in other circumstances. I mean, again, this is a bit, CSO-y, but I think it's pretty well done, and I think the videotape is helping with that, much as my preference in terms of the texture you get for outside stuff of Doctor Who of this period is for film. But I think that's pretty damn good considering what we could have had and what we're used to in Doctor Who of this period. I don't think there are many duff production moments in this at all, or performance moments. And the laser is rather casually dispensed here. But I quite like that, the fact that they go, yeah, we've got this thing, and we're not gonna play it like it's some amazing thing. We're unit, we've got access to a laser. Don't work. The end. I quite like that, and it's again the effect is simple but nifty. I don't know what Sergeant Henderson has done to annoy the Doctor, but he's going to be very horrible to him. This I mean, I as I say, I read a lot of Target books, and the pattern of base under siege was very much what I was used to of Doctor Who, and this is pretty much what this story has become. We had the cottage under siege, and now we've got the mansion under siege. And he's so good at close-ups, isn't he? Douglas Camfield. He really trusts his actors, but he knows the right angle to give them so that the close-ups are sort of imposing and slightly oppressive, and increase the intensity. Very good. But even the way that Major Beresford went fire, 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 and slightly that the pace of the edit was picked up slightly quicker, so it wasn't fire, same amount of time, fire, same amount of time. It was fire, 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 and it just that slightly quickening of the pace of the editing. It's that sort of attention to detail that means that it's the pacing. Camfield is very good at pacing and atmosphere in a way that some directors have multi-camera to capture the action, to get it all in, to get all the story out and the exposition out. Camfield's camera brings something extra. His sense of atmosphere and pace brings something extra. I love Tony Beckley. He is so good. But Douglas Camfield has got to be one. This is his last, isn't it? Oh my goodness. This is the last Doctor Who that Douglas Camfield does, and it's when I remember reading, in Doctor Who: A Celebration, where it gave the breakdown of all the stories, but it also said who wrote and directed each one, and Douglas Camfield's name was on stories, as early as Planet of Giants and the Time Meddler. That's a great model as well. I mean, it does. Oh, that's a pretty impressive tentacle. It's got girth, hasn't it? And that's the stuff of Doctor Who. A tentacle smashing through a window, threatening a soldier. Love it. It's like we're under siege. You are under siege. Oh, and all this stuff with the ceiling being bashed in and the plaster falling. Tom, you go and do that. Says Sergeant Henderson has just actually been really brave, and and the Doctor sort of has decided he doesn't really give a monkeys about this guy. But that's a nice moment where he gives Scorby the gun, and Scorby can almost quite not believe it, and then he realizes, oh, hang on, there's the worst thing about this story, the slightly too light spanner. There we go. That's the only thing in the story that doesn't work. And it's so no matter how good an actor Tony Beckley is, you can't pick up a really light polystyrene or whatever it is rubber spanner, and make it seem like a metal spanner. Maybe you can, but it wasn't in. Tony Beckley didn't do that class in drama school. But that's great. This is just tiny effect, slightly slowed down of the green stuff smashing against the plaster of what I assume is a model, and John Chalice has got his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, and it just feels like everybody's getting a little bit down and a little bit dirty and fraying at the edges. And this is great because he's the hard man. And John Chalice does this really well. And as people have said, Scorby is a character that undergoes genuine character development, and he's he's so much more than, henchman of the week. He's fully rounded. And I love the fact that the Doctor he's pouring his heart out, and the Doctor doesn't even quite register it, because this man's tragedy is so small and pathetic, and yet he is, no more than you, Scorby. And the Doctor's got the measure of him, and is not prepared to sort of try and make him feel better, even because he sort of hasn't got the time, and he's not as unpleasant to him as he was to poor old Sergeant Henderson, who's about to get chopped up for compost, which I always feel poor Sergeant Henderson spends his small amount of time in the season doing quite brave and useful things, having the Doctor dismiss him quite unpleasantly, and then getting knocked out by a rubber spanner and chopped to bits. And this is great. The fact that Scorby has kind of lost it, but without it undermining the character, he's still the same guy, and it's not that he's gone mad, and done a Salamar or whatever, where it's all just a bit tiresome when the commander snaps, as it were, and that's a bit of a Doctor Who trope. This is a slightly superior version of that, and again, the fact that the Doctor hasn't really got time. Hasn't got the time for it, and all they can do is shut the door behind him, and this is perfect Doctor Who. And I remember reading this in the book and actually wanting him to get away, because for all the horrible things that he'd done, he had been their sort of brave kind of mate. It's a shame that because this is a wide shot, you can't see all the plants moving about as you could in the close-up shots, but some minor, they can't do that. But I think this is brilliant, and I remember it's very tense in the book where he's nearly there and he's nearly there and he's nearly there. But that's a sort of John Chalice does a lot of pulling that on him, but you can't really tell. It does actually feel like the thing has risen up and enveloped itself around him. I think that's really effectively done, and that's the end of Scorby, who is fantastic. Character who gets some real moments there, and makes a run for it, and does it in the book. That piece of water is the sort of last bit between him and sort of freedom, and you feel like he's almost made it. It's and he gets pulled under, but I think that's not a, the fact that it could never be quite the same in the TV version is not a disappointment. It works. It's very, very well done. And I believe John's anecdote was that he had to do it twice because they didn't capture it the first time, and it was absolutely freezing. I think that was right, and he got some brandy. I interrupted myself talking about Camfield, didn't I? Douglas Camfield was a name that that was in and was usually attached to the Web of Fear. The Dalek Master Plan, the one Pertwee did, Inferno, and then the two Tom Bakers he does, Terror of the Zygons and the Seeds of Doom, which were, these were real names to wrestle with. And I remember assuming that he must have died because he didn't, because Douglas was quite a Camfield, like Dennis Spooner, they all seem like sort of slightly old men names. And then, when I grew up, you discovered Douglas Camfield died at 52, Dennis Spooner at 55, and they weren't old men at all. Sergeant's no longer with us. He's in the garden. It's so creepy. But Camfield wasn't dead when I was reading Doctor Who: A Celebration, but he then did die the following year, didn't he? January 84, I think. So and I remember reading about it. It was one of the few Doctor Who magazines that I got that said, and I think it did a little thing saying Douglas Camfield had died. And he had a show, I think, was it Missing from Home, that was heavily trailed, and it starred Judy Lowe, and I think that was shown posthumously. But I sometimes complain these days that our television purveyors don't get their dues, and it's one of the reasons I try and write obituaries for people where I can. But Camfield there was no sort of voiceover or little plaque or anything at the end. And in fact, I found out there's lots of great close up here, and then it's like he punches her in the face. It's horrible. Whatever he does there, they leave it to the imagination. Excellent model, brilliant work, Richard Conway here. The model of the house and the model crinoid is absolutely fantastic. It's quite a leap from the Keith Ashley, Ronald Goff in a costume, CSO slightly grown, to that obviously sort of stop motion kind of thing. But I think that's we're used to that in Doctor Who of this period, where different effects don't necessarily quite marry in the way that you'd want them to now. And in fact, the CGI Slitheen and the costume Slitheen are as big as a leap, to be honest. It's interesting that they never, I think they decided, did they, to not mix their methods of creation after that. But I think the effects here, everyone in every department is on top of their game. But yes, Camfield, very young, and yes, as I said, but I discovered since that quite a few actors that we know and love did sort of their final roles were shown after they died, and very often didn't get a mention in the programme or anywhere. And some actors that you'd think would get an obit in the stage, or at least a mention in the stage, Duncan Lamont, Paul Whitson-Jones didn't. John Stratton, I don't think, did. Or if he got the stage, he didn't get any of the big papers. So I sometimes think, I'm prone to sort of go, things were much more respectful in the olden days, and I get annoyed when people get missed off the BAFTA in memoriams and that sort of thing. But I fear, sadly, 'twas ever thus, and I just romanticise the past because I wasn't there, so it must have been better then. Stock footage of RAF jet planes. It's funny, isn't it? Sometimes when we have stock footage of military stuff, it's always it's often quite jauntily scored. I always, when I read military stuff and things, I always thought of it as being quite hard and harsh. But there's something about our tradition and the people that score this stuff and shoot this stuff and whatever, that if you think of the Invasion, which has got that clanging, oppressive soundtrack, except for the unit theme, which is all do 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 do, and it's sort of like it emphasises the sort of jamboree-like element of a military display rather than the hard as nailsness of actual military action, which I think's an interesting observation that I am not going to build on now. I've just noticed that there's a bit of celery underneath Elizabeth Slade in there. And he's absolutely not going to let Harrison Chase kill Sarah. Now, and again, I think my brother said, why hasn't he got her out first before untying her? So why do people watch things looking for any number of reasons? But why do people watch things looking for things to criticise? That's another reason I try it, because it's so easy. Because every decision you make when you're just staging something has so many things to take into account, angle, filming, practicality, what the actors can do, what you're suggesting to the audience, blah blah blah. It's not as easy as it looks, and I think you have to go. You gain nothing by not trusting the program makers and going, these people know what they're doing and have done things for a reason or done things because they've had to. I think that's as much as I think I really wanted as a younger person, to see a bit more of Chase's demise. And you could have really Robert Shaw'd that, bit in Jaws where Quint, gets sort of clamped between the guts and it spits blood out. You could have had all of that. And of course the cutting back after the scream to the teeth of the thing when there's no blood and gore that is a kind of, we're doing a kids program here, guys. We can't show what's left behind of Harrison Chase, but it's as a concept, it's pretty gruesome, isn't it? And the holding of the hands and I think, isn't it? Again, it's sort of suggested in the book that what Chase is doing there is the doctor's trying to pull him out, and it's not just that Chase can't go out. He's actually trying to pull the doctor in because he's that much of a psycho plant. But anyway, the story is resolved by the RAF saying, let's turn it into chop suey. But basically, the RAF blowing up the house. So sort of all the doctor has done is radioed UNIT and said, can you kill this monster, please? But they do have a moment of sort of intelligence here where, there's one final problem that they have to solve with their intelligence. And, it's through Sarah's frustration enunciating their problem. And the doctor, the steam, I think, would have burnt his hand through his hat there, but it doesn't matter. They have one final moment where they have to use their intelligence a bit, which tries to paper over the cracks of the fact that essentially, the doctor's just phoned someone and said, can you end the story for me now, please? But do I mind? I don't really mind. I think not, and it's odd because I write and I like scripts to sort of tie up to, plant things at the beginning that pay off at the end. See, it's that jaunty music. Why jaunty? Brilliant model effect anyway. And, some stock footage blows up a model. And it's all suggested by a man in a bowler hat and some soldiers hiding behind a tree. But it's reasonably, it's action packed and it's a great model. But, I find it very satisfying when something like, a script that's watertight, like The Empty Child, The Doctor Dances, where lots of little things that have been seeded early on get paid off at the end, and it ties in thematically, but it's also clever plot. It's hiding there in plain sight, and it makes you go, and all that sort of stuff tying together, a jigsaw pieced together and fitting beautifully. And sometimes it's a really fascinating, scary, intense, exciting journey, and at the end everything just gets blown up. And I do admire Doctor Who when its scripts do very, very clever flourishes, but this script has so many funny moments, so many tense moments, so many good characters, that if that's how it decides to end, I can forgive it. Now, I would be less forgiving if a story did that, but had done nothing less on the journey that was worthwhile, and actually just had less of even the way that Tom Baker sits there and looks at Sir Colin with that, having been so vicious and unkind all the way through, he is Earth's friend and our friend, and he's a charming presence. Look, and that sort of amused idea that he has of inviting Sir Colin with him, I love it. And the fact that Sir Colin's wife is expecting him home for tea is rather delightful. And of course the TARDIS never came here, so this ending makes absolutely no sense. It's a very silly scene, this, but Elizabeth Sladen's I'm really cold acting is excellent, and Tom Baker's just magic. So this is a slightly let's bung on a Scooby-Doo ending or whatever. But she looks cold. She probably is, actually. Have we been here before? Again, I mean, this ending might annoy me, but it doesn't, because I love them both. And they are so good. And even though that ending makes no sense because the TARDIS didn't go there, I don't care. Now, is that me being biased? Or do I have a bias towards this era? Well, odd, because it's not the era I grew up with. my earliest memory is Invisible Enemy on repeat. My earliest proper memories really are bits of season 16, but mostly season 17. So, and the Target novels I read all different eras. So I don't think it's that. I think it's that when I came to the Hinchcliffe Holmes era, having read the books, they were the ones that were the least disappointing in key areas. Maybe is that sounds terrible because I love Doctor Who, and but it was largely disappointing. But I've talked about this before, how one's expectation based on reading the Target novels was such. But the Hinchcliffe and Holmes era are very it's muscular storytelling. There's an atmosphere and a seriousness that I like, but that doesn't mean it's dry. It's never not funny because Tom Baker is so funny, but everybody else seems to know how to behave around him, and there's no most of the performances, and in that there's not a bad performance, I don't think, in the Seeds of Doom. The direction is superb. So the fact that all of those ingredients are so marvelous, it's like having, I like a pizza, and that's like having a pizza with all the absolutely best ingredients on it, but it's just a pizza. But I love pizza and would probably want pizza most days if I could have it. So whereas, yes, The Empty Child, The Doctor Dances may be, a precisely cooked lobster with saffron and handmade this, that, and the other. I like pizza too, and this is a really good pizza. Vegetarian, naturally. So what's my favourite thing of episode 6? Well, we've had Scorby. I think I would have chosen, Scorby's descent, because I think he just ascends beyond, Henchmanville, and is a really interesting character. And I love to salute John Challis because he's a sort of minor national institution, because he wasn't the star of Only Fools and Horses, but everybody knew who he was, and he was a delightful fellow, and actually, really, really good at, a household name for being a comic character in Only Fools and Horses, and yet proves there, what a great, what great actors some people we know from only one type of performance, see them giving another. And he actually, of course, he had that career where he also played, he started his career playing those sorts of hard men, and there's a reason why. But I love the fact that we have in existence, an example, examples of his range that's just much more than we might than most people who know him as Boycie would credit him for. I suppose. That model work is superb too, but I suppose. I'm going to cheat slightly, I guess. I suppose for episode 6, I will choose Douglas Camfield. And the reason I can choose him is, one, it's his last episode. Oh, God, that's heartbreaking. He was approached to do the 5 Doctors, wasn't he? But he was already well booked up. Douglas Camfield was a great servant to Doctor Who. He worked on the very first story. We've got his voice on the pilot, when Jacqueline Hill says, "Douglas, hello." But yeah, was pretty much, I'd assumed he was dead. That's a terrible thing, isn't he? Because everyone seemed so old when I was, whatever I was, 10, 11. And people have assumed people are dead and not got them for DVD releases when they were older and wiser than I was later. But let's not get into that. But Douglas Camfield, who actually wasn't old and died far too young, was a brilliant director of Doctor Who. Oh, he was so good. His action sequences are really ambitious and really good. And we know that he loved the military, but what that means is that he was fastidious about making all the military aspects of his productions seem plausible, and that gives a very realistic backbone to the fantastical, which is essential for Doctor Who, and that really helps then, and that quest for sort of quite earthy, gritty realism where it's needed helps then offset the fantastical and lets the fantastical sort of speak for itself. It's because it's enough of a contrast to the reality that goes on elsewhere. And his scenes drip. He's so good at doing atmosphere, which is sort of just about where he points his camera, but also it means that the actors, and when we do Zygons, I'll probably talk a lot about how John Levine is a different actor when Camfield's there, and it's whatever Camfield does is he's got everybody just taking it that bit more seriously or making it that bit more real, but sometimes sort of rather uncompromisingly so. It serves the character and the plot and the atmosphere, the way that he gets his actors to behave. And he was such a key figure in those early years of Doctor Who, and the fact that he worked with the first 4 Doctors, and the fact that that all of his stories are really well directed. All of his stories are good, actually. Now, isn't that interesting? Because they're all good. I think all of the Camfield stories are, at a base level, competent productions, watchable, good television. Now you can start to pick holes and say, well, that story ends, that script runs out of steam or whatever. But that's when but I think just as presented as pieces of television, as adventures of Doctor Who, he pulls them off, and he pulls them off well, every single one. I think they're all good Doctor Who stories, Camfield Productions, and that's not a coincidence. Now, it may be that they gave, he had to pick of the scripts, or they had to lure him with high quality ones, but he was doing it early on. There's some limp fight scenes in the Time Meddler, and he obviously learnt from that. But we'll talk about David Anderson when we get to the reasons behind that when we do the Time Meddler. But it's still an excellently realised production, and some of the the set design and the external scenes filmed in the studio have a realism and a verisimilitude that other productions of the time don't have. And when we get to Dalek's Master Plan, which is relatively early in his directing career, he's doing extraordinary things. I'm so sad about Douglas Camfield. He was young, and it was at a time when television directors, certainly of everyday entertainment, although he did go on, he did have an illustrious career. He did the Ivanhoe, and he did the television series he did were high end, but people didn't really talk about television directors. I don't think he got a notice in any national papers or anything like that. And I know I obsess about this sort of stuff, and actually it doesn't make any difference to you when you're dead. And I suppose the fact that we remember him now, when perhaps some directors of the time who were more fated because they did more highbrow stuff aren't remembered quite so well because of the way that Doctor Who endures and because of the way that we talk about it. And as I say, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because he stopped being Douglas Camfield in January 1984, and everything after that doesn't make any difference to him. But in my own small way, I find it moving that we can talk about somebody that he did do a couple of events, didn't he? But he was, before I would have ever had a chance to, I was never going to meet. I shared this earth with for pretty much exactly 10 years, yeah, because he died in January 84. I was 10 in January 84. But I'm such an admirer of his, and every time I go back to his work, I cannot believe the stuff that he's pulling off under the circumstances that we know Doctor Who had to be pulled off in. So Douglas Camfield is my choice for part 6, but of course he directed all 6 episodes. But it's his last episode. and I think it's a pretty good one to go out on. And he was excellent. He was a really good director. And so for the whole thing, well, I mean, I chose Mark Jones, didn't I? But I've talked about all of the cast. I have to choose the cast. I think it's... I used to play a game with a friend of mine and say, I bet you can't name a Doctor Who story that hasn't got... No, he used to say, but you can't choose a Doctor Who story that hasn't got one, slightly subpar performance in it. And I thought he was quite ungenerous sometimes when I go, well, what? Hang on, how about... But I think with the Seeds of Doom, I can't remember what he chose. I think he just went, the Butler. And I think he was cheating there. I think because there's nothing wrong with what the Butler does. In fact, the Butler is absolutely perfect. Seymour Green is absolutely pitch perfect as the Butler. He plays exactly what he has to play with that. And it's not John Aitchison's fault that he's not Nicholas Courtney. I don't think Major Beresford is the most memorable character, but he doesn't do anything wrong. And I think the other performances are all excellent. I think the three guys in the base are very good. I think Hubert Rees particularly is really, really good as Stevenson, but they all do a good job there in the base. Those three men for very short-lived characters who feel like they're going to be in the whole thing. Kenneth Gilbert does so much more with Dunbar than I think could have been done. Mark Jones is absolutely superb and one of the best Doctor Who performances of all, considering what the part is, which is snivelling factotum who becomes monster. He does so much more with that. I think Tony Beckley, I could have chosen for any episode, that intense psychotic villainy that he does, the fact that it's camp without being stupid, the fact that it's mad without being daft, and then John Challis that I've talked about. Sylvia Coleridge, wonderful colour. She just pitches that just right. It's a lovely comic character, and Michael Barrington as Thackeray, who does the stuffy civil servant when he needs to, but the quite serious figure of authority where it needs to happen as well. So I'm going to choose the cast for the whole thing and Camfield for 6. But I could have chosen anything. I could have chosen the lighting. I could have chosen the effects. Roger Murray Leach's design is superb. It's really good. It's really good. And I get that if you want to, you can pick flaws, particularly in the resolution of the story. But I just think that the rest of the ingredients are so good that you don't need to. It doesn't matter. The journey is more interesting than the destination in a way. And I think that's happened in other periods of Who history where it's less forgivable because the endings have made no sense and have just been a bit in one bound they're free. That ending makes sense. It's just a bit lazy. The Doctor phones for a bomb. But that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. What would they have done? Got some sort of weed killer that they dispensed in a clever way. Oh, it just doesn't matter. Have the bomb because everything else is so good. And yes, I understand people who feel it's a bit more Avengers-y than it is Doctor Who-y. But Doctor Who's often at its best when it's not quite the Doctor Who that we expect. Doctor Who that breaks them. Doctor Who is... Sometimes it's the atypical Doctor Who stories, although there's so much of this that is absolutely typical because in terms of the feel of it in the Hinchcliffe era, it feels like a high-end Hinchcliffe Who, but also script-wise, it does... Yeah, it does feel like there are elements of it from another series. So it's a mixture of the absolutely typical and the atypical, and that's quite a nice mix. But also, sometimes when Doctor Who breaks the mold and isn't quite the Doctor Who you expect it to be, is what makes it interesting because it's going against the grain of what the rest of the series is doing at that time, and you go, oh, Doctor Who's being slightly different. I quite like that. The same but different. Is kind of what I like. What's Chris saying? Can you tell I quite like the Seeds of Doom? I love it. I love it. I could watch it again now from the beginning and not chunter all the way through it because it's really good. Chris.
And episode 6. Now, in fairness, episode 6 of Seeds of Doom is not very good. Now, this is, and maybe I found this even more rewatching it. I love the start of the story so much, and of course, famously, the Doctor says, you know, he tries to dissuade Scorby from using guns and so on against the Krynoid, and ultimately calls in the Air Force and unit Sans Brigadier unit bombs the Krynoid from the air, and it explodes and dies. Hooray! And that's the end of the story. And it's just not a very good Doctor Who ending. It's a real shame that. I mean, you could say, you know, it's been a brutal story, and maybe the Doctor needs to use brutal means to create an end. But it's not very satisfying, and it means that the heroes are kind of left slightly impotent, you know, being attacked by vines inside the house. And you know, I think that there's some good stuff with Scorby. I think we learn a bit more about his mercenary past. There's a few throwaway lines about that, and he does get killed by weeds in a pond, which is a slightly embarrassing end for the poor guy. But it looked, I mean, and John Challis commits to that. You know, that look, I'm sure that was filmed on a very cold day. So they, even that, which is a slightly silly fate, they do go for it. I would say, I mean, I really like the image of the stop motion Krynoid towering above the house. And I almost had this done as a illustration for my wedding. I was going to have the posh country house we got married in with a Krynoid superimposed over it. And I didn't quite get around to doing it. But that image of the Krynoid towering above the house really does stay with you and is a lovely image. And the stop motion's great. I think it's more effective at that scale than it probably is in the middle stage when it's a big Christmas tree. So I would really go with that. At the same time, oh yeah, the other thing I love in that episode is the final scene, the trip that the Doctor and Sarah make to Cassiopeia. This isn't Cassiopeia. In their in Sarah's swimming costume, the Doctor, of course, in hat and coat and scarf, but the beach ball. And I know we get 2 more episodes of Sarah in season 14, but that scene on supposed Cassiopeia is kind of the peak of their relationship for me. You know, it's kind of the lasting image I have of them just laughing and enjoying the universe is lovely. But of the 2, I think I'll go with the image of the stop motion model of the image of the Krynoid towering above the house. I think I'll go with that. Cassiopeia, close second. Minus points for boring resolution and unit being a bit crap. I'm not surprised. I mean, I don't know if Nick Courtney, I think he was unavailable, but I don't know if he made himself unavailable for the story, because it would be such a thankless role for the Brig to come in for an episode and a half or so and just be the guy on a walkie-talkie calling in the planes. You know, I'm kind of glad he didn't do it in a way. It's a silly story to just bring unit in at the end like that, and I wish they'd found another way. Composting was great. You know, Chase getting killed in his own compost machine, that's really nasty. And again, the story has that ruthlessness there, and it feels very real, and everybody commits to it properly. But I would say bloody massive Krynoid. That's probably the thing. Now, I think you've asked me also for a bonus thing for the story. I don't know. I've mentioned quite a few of them. I think I might pick one that I've mentioned as a second place. I would say, I think because I've not mentioned it. You know, I think Robert Banks Stewart, actually. I think that in particular, not necessarily the plotting, which I think you could still tweak. I think the dialogue, so Robert Banks Stewart dialogue, that's my bonus point. I think that I think it's some of the best dialogue that a Doctor and companion have ever had. And whether that's, you know, the end of everything, even your pension and so on, all that kind of stuff. And we've talked about, this is Sarah Jane, she's my best friend. I love Hargreaves with his kind of, oh, if you say so kind of attitude. and I could play all day in my green cathedral, just act natural. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart had perfect pitch, all that kind of stuff. I think it's beautiful, and I don't care if maybe it was an old Avengers script. I don't care. Doctor Who's always taking things and recycling them, just like compost going into the garden. So I think it's beautifully, certainly in terms of the dialogue, beautifully written, and maybe the wittiest outside of City of Death. I think it's probably the wittiest dialogue Doctor Who ever had. So that would be my bonus point. Robert Banks-Stewart's witty dialogue. I hope you enjoyed Seeds of Doom, Toby. It's been a pleasure talking to you about it. Hopefully see you again soon on a shoot for a film with me and you. That would be nice. And I hope people enjoy watching the Seeds of Doom the next time they watch it, because it's bloody brilliant. Bye!
Oh, bless him. He's such a nice man, Chris. He really is a very cheerful and benign fellow, but dogged. He works hard, and when he's got a shoot on the go, he pushes for what he wants to get, but in a very nice way. But he's a top fella. And I'm glad he chose the Seeds of Doom. I feel a bit bad now for not choosing Robert Banks-Stewart, because he's right. Typical of me to choose the cast, but I had to. And I did have Robert Banks-Stewart lurking there, and I was like, yeah, it's a good script. But he's right. And City of Death is a self-consciously quite funny, very funny script. The Seeds of Doom is a dramatic, tense, scary story that has so many funny bits in, none of which take away from the drama. And I think that Chris is absolutely right to pick. And I think that Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart scene is absolutely brilliant and pitched perfectly. And there are so many quotable lines. And Robert Banks-Stewart, like Geoffrey Bergen and Douglas Camfield, is part of that, two story synthesis of styles, which is Terror of the Zygons and Seeds of Doom, which are both excellent. And I think Robert Banks-Stewart has a really good ear for Doctor Who. He has a great dynamic between the regulars. His guest characters are all very, very good. But yes, he pushes the drama through, but he never fails to inject scenes with urgency and wit. And it is a really funny script. And I wish I'd chosen Robert Banks-Stewart. I had the great pleasure of meeting him. It was at the commentary of Terror of the Zygons, which I didn't moderate, but it was done on the same day as a couple that I did. So I made sure that I had a quick chat with Mr. Stewart, because he's a television legend. And, when I was young, his name was all over the credits of things that were on the telly. So it felt like, there's this guy that did Doctor Who who's doing, big high-end stuff. He created Bergerac, didn't he? Which was a huge show when I was younger. He's a bit of a television legend. I wrote his obit actually for The Guardian, so I'm pleased I got to do that. He definitely deserves credit, because I think it's a superb script. It goes beyond what it does with the story, which is tell an adventure and have an interesting monster and have a great villain and all of that sort of thing. But every shot of Camfield or every little piece of staging does a little bit more than is necessarily required. I think Banks-Stewart's dialogue and character moments and bits and bobs just add an extra little bit of something. And I think that's why the synthesis of him and Camfield is a particularly winning combination, especially when you've got the backup of Holmes, who I think is simpatico with Robert Banks-Stewart. The voice of Robert Banks-Stewart and the voice of Robert Holmes seem to me not too different as in the way that Chris Boucher also complements, I think, well, Robert Holmes's writing style and the way that he has characters interact, and the fact that you have this colourful dialogue that isn't camp, these rich characters that aren't that are somehow real as well. I wish I'd chosen Robert Banks-Stewart, but I also stand by my choice of that uniform cast and the wonderful Douglas Camfield. It's, and I don't think either of us even got anywhere near Geoffrey Bergen, whose music is, superior. It's a superior Doctor Who score, but there's so much. And I mean, the crinoid model that Chris chose, absolutely fair enough. Richard Conway was an excellent special effects guy. Everybody is on the top of their game with the Seeds of Doom. So yeah, any quibbles, I would happily push them into the composter, and what they would shoot out at the other end is rich and nourishing, and just makes my enthusiasm for Doctor Who grow all over again. So I liked it in my salad days when I was green of judgment, and I still like it today. So thanks to Chris, thanks to you for listening. God bless Robert Banks Stewart and Douglas Camfield and Robert Holmes and Tony Beckley, John Challis, Mark Jones, Elizabeth Sladen, those TV heroes that are no longer with us, but will be entertaining us for years and years to come. I love the Seeds of Doom. I love doing this podcast if there are people who want to listen to it, and I hope you loved listening to me loving the Seeds of Doom. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke. My special guest this time around is Chris Chapman, who can be found on Twitter at ChrisChapman81. I'm grateful to him and, of course, to the many patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Ruben Herfindahl, Stephen Moffat, Nick Tedston, Neil Tate, Richard Straw, Christopher Meredith, Rob Leonard, Ronald Hayden, Peter Harness, Chris Phone, Peter Burns, Kevin West, Michael Herbert, Dr. Gary Thomas, Olivia Hayden, C.M., Andrew Larson, Jeff Edwards, Steve Cunniff, Jace Mayo, Chris Williams, Aaron Gulyas, Andrew Jolly, Ollie Bannett, Keith Adams, Steve O'Brien, David Bickley, and Gareth Bowley. Oh, Gareth. I've got it right once, haven't I? Gareth, Bowley Bowley Boo. There, you've been mentioned loads of times. The music is by Dave Gates and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. Oh, should I go and do that again? No, Gareth, I'll check your message, but a broken clock never tells the right time twice a day. A late night Toby Hadoke got your name right during one of those ejaculations. Anyway, there we go. If you would like to be a patron, well, one of the gifts is that you get your name mangled. Now, I'm very touchy when people mangle my name, so there's no excuse. So that was all good humoured. Anyway, yes, if you would like to have your name read, not particularly expertly by me, and the frequency that happens to you depends. That's one of the bonuses on the higher tiers at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. There are many things that you get at the lowest tier. Most things you get at the lowest tier of £3 per month. You even get 10% off that if you sign up for a year in advance. But yes, one of the many things that you get is to have your name read out. But the higher up the tier sphere you go, the more often that happens. But other than that, most things are available at the lowest tier, as I say. And I understand if you can't commit to a monthly thing, but you could go to ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke. No name reading out there, but you do get the chance to just sort of donate as much or as little as you like, as infrequently or not as you want. You just do a one-off at some point because you particularly liked an episode, or if I sounded particularly hungry or needy, or you'd read about me having to remortgage my house. But that's ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke. But what you can do that costs you nothing is to give these a 5-star review and lots of lovely words of appreciation anywhere that you go online, because that stuff really helps to separate these from the crowd, and well, it just means it's worth the time and effort. Thanks. Now, you see, part of me wants to go back and re-record those closing titles so they sound more proper and like a proper radio broadcast, because I like to pretend that this is done properly. And I used to practice reading credits when I was a kid. It was one of my things I'd do for fun. So, I want to do it properly. But this isn't a proper BBC production. This isn't proper radio. I don't have a team. It's just me and with a microphone. So why pretend otherwise? And I hope it wasn't disrespectful of Gareth. I got it wrong, then right, I think. But your blame praise tricks with you late at night, and you suddenly go, "No, I was right the first time." So there we go. A proper professional job would have been to have gone back and re-recorded it. But why pretend this is anything other than what it is, which is a man and a microphone, a bit of desperation. Now, as this is the story that's all about plants, it's worth picking up on Buddleia Gate. Keen listeners may have, hung on every word I was talking about during Silver Nemesis episode 2, where I spotted on the site of what is now the Millennium Dome a Buddleia growing, and mentioned that I'd got one that had sprouted from my wall and is one of the most successful pieces of propagation. Unlike Arnold Keeler, I didn't nurture it at all. It just sort of worked. But if you have a garden and you've got a plant that prospers, you take a certain amount of pride in it. But I did get messages, so thank you. Yes, I did get messages from people going, "No, you really need to kill that Buddleia. It's going to destroy your wall." And I mentioned that to Sherilee, which is the worst thing to do, because she'd already asked me to, because we had a taxi driver that once dropped us off and said, "That'll destroy your wall." He said, "Walls are really expensive. You need to kill the Buddleia." And then, because I got messages after Silver Nemesis that reopened Buddleia Gate, and it is the wall that my front gate is on, so gate is very appropriate. I have, during this summer, between Silver Nemesis and now, this story that is a celebration of, it's a dire warning of the dangers of rampant plant life. So you'll be pleased to know I've killed the Buddleia. I had to chop it down in stages, and it produced quite a lot of wood. And then I've sort of painted and sprayed the stump with some killer that's still on a secret list. So Harrison Chase, sadly, will not be very pleased with me, but those of you that got in touch after Silver Nemesis said, "Get rid of the Buddleia." The Buddleia has been destroyed. So that's one in the eye for you, plants. But the rest of the garden is looking absolutely beautiful, and the plants that I did actually plant myself and have propagated are looking all right. We've got some nice lilies popping out, some roses look very pretty, and I grew some scabious from seeds, and they're lovely. I would argue we've got a few too many white flowers in our garden at the moment. Sherilee likes a giant daisy, but just looking at the way it's all come out, I think next year we need a few different colours to break up the sea of white, but that's our problem. Anyway, I do enjoy a bit of gardening, actually. I'm quite happy tootling in the garden. I can heartily recommend it. It's a great way to zone out and feel at one with nature, and eventually decide that mankind has had a go, and now it is our turn. Anyway, yes, I'm going to go and wash my very green fingers. I really enjoyed doing the Seeds of Doom. I really enjoyed that. I actually got a bit emotional about Douglas Camfield and Robert Banks-Stewart and all those lovely names, and Jeffrey Berg and Robert Holmes. But I really did love that, and I really do. And I like Chris Chapman a lot as well. He's been very good to me. Made some lovely films that I've been pleased to be a part of. So this is a high watermark for me. I've really enjoyed doing this episode and this story, and it's nice to know that you lot are out there still listening to this stuff. So thank you to you. And now may you all be eaten by plants. Ha 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 ha.